If there's one thing Team Fortress 2 proved, it's that people love to collect and wear hats. While that may not have been developer gears for breakfast inspiration for A Hat in Time, an action platforming game recently released on Steam, it's clear they're aiming to corner the market on hat-based gameplay. Nearly $300,000 was raised from an extremely successful Kickstarter, almost 10 times the original asking price of $30,000. Needless to say, A Hat in Time destroyed all of its stretch goals. A Hat in Time is a collectathon game, a type of genre coined in the 90s with the advent of 3D action platformers with a focus on collecting items to fuel game progression. Some of the most famous games of the genre include Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and Spyro the Dragon. For quite some time after the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation eras, the genre stagnated and all but disappeared, until recently with the explosive popularity of Yooka-Laylee, a spiritual successor to the Banjo-Kazooie games. Riding on the back of that popularity and success is, you guessed it, the game we'll be reviewing today. Tip your fedoras and warm up those thumbs. We're collecting our thoughts on A Hat in Time. A Hat in Time is about a little girl, usually referred to as Hat Kid. She's a spacefaring traveler that, at the beginning of the game, is traveling toward home. Her spaceship is comedically assaulted by a mafia man, and in damaging her spaceship door, he inadvertently causes Hat Kid's spaceship to lose its power supply. These timepieces are the centerpiece of the game, and your task in every level is to collect one of them. There's plenty to do than simply collect timepieces, and A Hat in Time is a pretty busy game. As we mentioned earlier in the intro, A Hat in Time is an action platforming / collectathon that borrows a lot from older, more nostalgic games in the genre. Hat Kid runs, jumps, double jumps, and dives her way through open levels, exploring high and low. The core gameplay is all about collecting items, and while there's puzzles to solve here and there, the primary focus is exploration, platforming, and collecting. The game's movement is clean and well refined for a platformer, which is important in a genre that demands accuracy. It does take some getting used to, however, because it has moves that aren't typically present in these kind of games, like the ability to run up walls for a little extra height. Still, you'll find yourself familiar with the controls after running around for an hour, and new movement options come infrequently enough that it's easy to grow familiar with them before you acquire the next one. Many of Hat Kid's abilities come from hats, which can be stitched together using collectible yarn balls. It's a good idea to grab these when you can reach them because you'll need a lot of them to unlock every hat in the game. Some of the earliest hats you'll receive in the game allow you to sprint, or mix and throw explosive concoctions. Each hat must be equipped individually to receive their benefits, but thankfully, the game has a handy fast switch menu that lets you completely bypass having to go into the menu every time. It took me a while to discover it, but it's a godsend and a logical addition to the game. There are additional benefits that extend beyond the hats. You can purchase and attach badges to hats, and each offers some sort of extra advantage when equipped. One of the most useful badges in the game, a collectible magnet, is acquired early on and allows you to grab some of the collectibles without actually touching them. This makes collecting one of the game's primary and most important resources, pawns, much easier. Another badge gives you a scooter when you're sprinting with the correct hat. This scooter has the same speed but better acceleration, turns faster, and allows you to jump without losing your momentum or your sprint. No doubt a useful badge for speedrunning. For additional challenge, the game has time rifts, obstacle courses that focus almost purely on platforming. There are two different kinds: traditional time rifts that are just one big level with a timepiece at the end, and what I call story time rifts. These story time rifts require you to collect royal pawns to progress and have optional art pieces to collect. At the end of the time rift, these art pieces come together to form a story that provides context to the world you're currently in. For example, in World 2, you'll find two bird directors fighting each other over who should win the Best Director award. In the world's Storytime Rift, the artwork you'll collect tells you that they dreamt about winning that award even as kids, and they both rented out the same studio with which to record their movies. This fuels their rivalry, of which you take part in throughout the second world. There's a lot of level variation in the game, and while the first world demands that you spend most of your time on Mafia Island, later levels are either large enough or varied enough to not get boring fast. For example, in the first act of World 2, you have to creep through various movie sets to try to find a timepiece. In one of the second acts of World 2, you'll solve a murder mystery on a train, complete with some stealth aspects. In the other, it's your job to appease your fans as a mysterious diva, and the higher your numbers, the better you'll do. This keeps things so fresh and unique that you're always eager to see what's next. Finally, one of the best additions to platformers that has been around for a while now is the lack of a live system. You can die as many times as you want, and the only real penalty is that you start over from the beginning of the level or a checkpoint. For longer levels without checkpoints, this can be a bit frustrating, but I never ran into a level without checkpoints that was so difficult that I couldn't conquer in the first or second try. On the topic of music, I have to say that the soundtrack for A Hat in Time is amazing, a real treat for the ears and a love letter to nostalgic collectathon fans. With a whopping 78 songs, A Hat in Time has such variety in its music that you'll never grow tired of listening to it. Some levels have several different tracks that play depending on the area you're in. While the developers tout that a number of different guest composers threw their hat in the ring for this game, the most notable name attached to the music is Grant Kirkhope, the man famous for the music in banjo-kazooie and various other games within the collectathon genre. Not every song in the game was touched by Mr. Kirkhope, but his unique style of music making is all too obvious to veteran collectathon fans. Perhaps my favorite aspect of the game was the voice acting. From the simple noises and quips that Hat Kid makes to the voices assigned to the game's various NPCs, it really helped to pull me into the game. Not sure if I'm right about this one or not, but there's a bird behind the counter in the first act of World 2 that sounded like Jonathan Jafari, better known as Jontron. Take a listen and you'll hear what I mean.
Oh hey little chirper, they're recording right now so no one's allowed in. We're only insured for bird staff. Letting you in would be a liability. Don't even think about sneaking inside.
As far as the graphics go, the best word I can think of for the art style is quirky, a sort of interesting mix between Super Mario Sunshine and Zelda the Wind Waker. There's a lot of things inspired by a number of other games from more than just the collectathon genre, and if you're a fan of them, it's hard to miss them when they pop up. These aren't just mere coincidences, these happen so frequently that it's pretty clear that it was done on purpose. In terms of level design, it's varied and interesting enough that it helps to distract from the fact that a lot of these kinds of levels have been done to death in similar games. One of the most enjoyable aspects of the game is collecting and utilizing various hat skins and color changing options for Hat Kid. There's so many in the game that you'll inevitably find hat skins and color combinations that you prefer. I'd have preferred that things like clothing, hair, and hat colors could be chosen and applied individually for greater customization, but there's so many that you'll inevitably find combinations that you'll enjoy anyway. It's time for an intermission. Go ahead down to the lobby and grab a drink, and then come on back. If you're already settled in, why not hit that subscribe button down below or join us on social media to see our latest ramblings and know when the latest videos have arrived. If you're the kind of person who likes to watch other people play video games instead of playing them yourself, we also have a Twitch page. Links to Twitch and social media pages are in the description below. Now, on to the final act. This is probably going to come as a shock to you, but a collectathon game can, indeed, have too many things to collect. The game most heavily criticized for having too many collectibles and potentially dealing the killing blow to the genre before it could really get off the ground is Donkey Kong 64. These days, DK64 is looked back upon with nostalgia, and therefore more favorably than it used to be, but for a very long time this particular game was accused of prematurely killing the genre. A Hat in Time has the same problem that DK64 had. There's just too much to collect. During the average playthrough you'll collect pawns, royal pawns, yarn, hats, badges, relics, rift tokens, vault codes, and the game's major collectible, timepieces. It's as if the people creating the game forgot that what made collectathon games so good wasn't actually the collectibles themselves, but the game worlds, the exploration, and the movement. While A Hat in Time gets all that right, the focus on collectibles is so heavy that after a short while you lose that sense of accomplishment you get from acquiring them. Giving players a steady stream of collectibles has an overall better effect on players than pouring them all over the player constantly. That sense of reward grows dull quickly in A Hat in Time because you're always collecting things. In a less important vein, one thing I found amusing is that the game isn't afraid to remind you that you're currently playing it. They plaster the game title on every single load screen. Not a huge issue or anything, but it's almost as if they were worried that you might think that you're playing a different game than the one you booted up. Like they were sitting around at a meeting discussing what they should put into the game and someone said, "Hey, we better make sure to let the player know what game they're playing at all times." A more important issue is that A Hat in Time has pretty bad camera and camera controls. Games like this traditionally have these issues, and I can't really recall a time that I've ever played a game in this genre that didn't. Just because every other 3D action platformer in the past 2 decades has a bad camera doesn't really excuse a hat in time, but it does help to know that bad cameras and camera controls have been a problem that no one seems to be able to solve. Last but not least, the game is a bit light on story. This is fine because the game doesn't really need it, and thorough players can find extra background and context. What really got me was the game has a tendency to flip from light to fluffy, then dark and macabre, then back again, seemingly at random. For example, Mustache Girl, an NPC you assist early in the game, suggests while planning an infiltration missions that they take the mafia men, kill them, and stuff the remains into jars. Later on, you discover that she did, indeed, do so to the mafia boss. Another excellent example is an act in World 4, where you're tasked with finding a timepiece in a haunted manor's attic. Have a sample of what to expect from this act. While doing some preliminary research on the game, I found a lot of praise for it. Many people called A Hat in Time the Mario killer. Having played through the vast majority of the game so far, I have my doubts that A Hat in Time or any future installment to this franchise will kill off Mario anytime soon. With the strong scores from the recent Super Mario Odyssey, and A Hat in Time failing to compare, it's safe to say that Mario isn't going anywhere anytime soon. On the plus side, fans of the game will be happy to know that it likely dealt a killing blow to Yooka-Laylee, its real major competitor. A Hat in Time is $30 as of this review, and I can confidently say that's a fair price for what's here. The average playtime seems to be around 8 hours, and nearly double that if you plan to collect and do everything. The game doesn't have a whole lot of replay value due to this length, but it does have speedrun potential if that's your thing, and even the developers seem to think so. There's speedrun tools in the options, like auto-skipping cutscenes and an in-game timer. Thanks for sticking around to the end. We'll see you next review.